All right, what's going on, Crossover family? Happy Wednesday night to everybody. We're going to be getting started here in just about 3 minutes. Go ahead and grab your cousins, your auntie, your uncle, your friends. Tag somebody that's a part of the Crossover family. Tell them we are live and in living color tonight. It's going to be a fun discussion. We got a little music that we'll play just to kind of get us started here in just a moment. But in the meantime, go ahead and get yourself settled. It's going to be so much fun. We're so glad to have you guys tonight with us. Come on in, Crossover family. So glad to have you guys tonight. Come on in. It's going to be so much fun. If you are visiting with us for the first time, go ahead and tell us where you're tuning in from. So glad to welcome you on behalf of our entire church family. We're so glad to have all of you guys hanging out with us tonight. It's going to be fun. I see the Daniels family is on. What's up? The Bakers, glad to have you guys. Mitchell family, what's going on? Hey, Chad, good to see you, my friend. Darian, what's up? Hey, Miss D, good to have you on the night. Yolanda. The Saloons are on from DC. I'm glad y'all got their safe. What's up, Trent? Good to see you, brother. Miss Gail, Miss Kimberly, glad to have you guys on tonight. All right, guys, it is 7 o'clock on the dot, and so glad to have all of you all with us tonight. It is a special night tonight. Last week we finished the book of Acts. Man, what a journey. 8 weeks walking through the book of Acts last week, and such an incredible time. And so glad to have all of you all that tuned in with us all 8 weeks. If you missed any part of that series, you can go back to our website and check it out. Watch it, lean in, take the notes. All the handouts from each week are on the website as well. And we're so excited. Of course, on Sundays, we have been in this book of James, walking through that and all the timeliness of it. Last week, we talked about what's the word count, what's the body count from your word count, the power of our words. The week before that, of course, we talked about in James 2 about prejudice and that kind of thing. And week 1, we talked about tests and trials, and all of those are very relevant for where we are in this series. And so we're very thankful to have all of you. I want to give a big quick high five to our team. I know that Pastor Tommy, if he were on tonight, he would echo this as well. Man, our team has been crushing it. We've been feeding people on Thursdays and Fridays, particularly on Fridays, and folks that are homeless and hungry. And I want to invite you guys, if you're looking for an opportunity to serve or to lean in to help people, then reach out to Lily. You can email her at the church, and she'll be glad to get you plugged in, either Lily or Loriana, or send us an inbox message right here on our Facebook page, and somebody on the team will follow up with you. Thank you all. Last week, so many of you guys showed up. Hundreds of people showed up for a prayer walk last week. Incredible. Every news outlet in the city featured it and talked about it. So that's all of my preliminaries. That's all I got for you for tonight, but it's so good. You want to share tonight's growth night. You want to share it. You want to tell people about it, because I got a power panel on here tonight, as you can see from their faces and their names. If you don't know who they are, I'm going to tell you in just a moment. I'm so thankful that our church is positioned. Pastor Tommy has been very, very busy advocating in so many different places. I've been so busy advocating in so many different places. And I believe that our church and our leadership and our team is positioned to be bridge builders in our city in an incredible way, and even beyond. And even to be able to assemble a panel like this tonight is just an incredible opportunity, incredible blessing. And so without further ado, let me just take a moment and formally introduce our three guests that are on tonight. I want to thank them for making time to be on tonight. I know for a fact that at least two of them have probably been zipping back and forth across our city and our county, having conversations, tough, difficult conversations for sure. And I know particularly one other of the guests that are on tonight has been working behind the scenes, having some tough conversations for sure. And so I'm glad that they made the time to be on with us. So let me start with our state attorney, Mr. Andrew Warren. Glad to have you on tonight, sir. Thank you so much for making the time to be with us. To give honor to your background and your role, tonight is not a political conversation in any way, even though you're in the middle of a race. I'm sure all of that stuff is taking a back seat to the realities of what we've got going on. But Andrew Warren was elected state attorney of the 13th Judicial District back in November of 2016. I can't believe it's been that long already. But here we are now in 2020. He leads approximately 130 prosecutors, 300 total employees, and prior to that, served in a number of different areas in law enforcement and in the legal space. Has worked in the Department of Justice, U.S. Department of Justice, and so many other things. Worked on some high-profile cases, and I've had the privilege to sit down with you personally over breakfast and have some very transparent and honest conversations. So, Mr. Warren, I'm thankful for you for being on with us tonight, sir.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me go now to Major Anthony Collins. Glad to have you on tonight, sir. Representing the Sheriff's Department, the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Department. And you and I have bumped into each other at a number of events over the last couple of years. And, the state attorney joked earlier about this, but it may be some truth to it. Every time we sort of look to the left and right and turn back around, you get a promotion. So congratulations to all the things that are happening for you.
Thank you, Pastor Harris.
Yes, sir. So you are a Tampa native, born and raised right here in Tampa, College Hill neighborhood, a graduate of King High School, served in the Army National Guard, began your career as a deputy sheriff in 2004, and obviously by virtue of you being a major, you have worked your way through the ranks of the Sheriff's Department and made an incredible impact. You serve on a number of board of directors, the Pace Center for Girls, the Derrick Brooks Charities Youth Programs Advisory Committee, the Achievement Schools Committee, with you and I served on that together, and then the Family Relations Board. So glad to have you. You're also a member of the NAACP, and I didn't mention this earlier, but Attorney Warren, you're married and have kids of your own as well. Major Collins, you are married and have kids of your own as well. So glad to have both of you all on with us tonight. And then last but certainly not least, Officer Portman, Ms. Darla Portman, who is a 18-year veteran of the TPD, has served 6 years on the board of directors for the Tampa Benevolent Police Association, which you're going to have to educate some people on what that is tonight. And you are now completing 1 full year term as the president of the Tampa PBA. You are married as well and have a family. And so thank you also for making your time and space to be on with us tonight.
Thank you.
Yep. So guys, it's been a busy last couple of months from a law enforcement and a community development standpoint. I think I'm safe to say that it's been tough, that there's been a roller coaster of emotions. It's been tense, and really some very, very uncomfortable conversations. So here's what I like to do. We're going to jump right into the deep end of the pool. Ms. Portman, let's start with you. I introduced you last, but I'll start with you. First of all, if I missed something in my introduction in terms of your bio, feel free to add that really quickly as a way of introduction. And then tell us what your role is as the president of the BPA, and then maybe land the particular part of this plane just for the beginning of the conversation with how you personally have been feeling over the last month or two with everything that's happening in our country and particularly in Tampa.
All right. Well, I'm a native Florida resident. I was born in St. Pete, St. Anthony's Hospital. I grew up in St. Pete. I went to USF and graduated in 2001 with my bachelor's in criminology. I've been a police officer for the last 18 years, patrol officer, specifically worked districts 1, 2, and 3. The only place I've never worked was south of Kennedy. I get lost down there. So I've worked pretty much every other place in Tampa. I'm married. I have 2 little girls at home. And what I do as the president at the PBA is to make sure that I take care of the community and our officers bridging the gap. My officers are my members. We make sure that we do a contract and take care of the officers' needs as far as the money and the wages that they get, the equipment that they need, the shifts that they work. I also deal with discipline. So discipline with officers, making sure that the punishment fits the crime, or if they have screwed up or messed up at work, that the management treats them accordingly. I also have to make the hard decisions and tell officers that do wrong, that, listen, I can't support you and the board doesn't support you. You need to either retire or resign, or you're just going to get fired. That's part of what we do as a union, but we also do things like we help out the community. I've given money to different organizations like PAL. We've helped out with kids in the sporting events. We've also helped out with the East Tampa Christmas tree. We gave money towards that to Brighton, East Tampa during the holidays last year. We help out with the Boys and Girls Club and give money to them with the bowling for the Chiefs Bowling League. There's a lot of things that we do that are really good. It's not just unions fighting against staff and I know you've heard a lot of bad things that are going across on the news, but that's not what exactly happens out here. And those last 2 months have been really hard because you hear one thing in the media, but really there's other things that are going on that are more factual. So.
Well, thank you again for being here, and we're gonna have an amazing conversation. Let me just mention really fast before the other two go. If you have questions, or as you have questions as we walk through this tonight, feel free to put those in the chat. We'll try to moderate those as best as we can. If we miss a question, we'll go back and we're going to watch this in detail, and we will make sure that we make sure we get an answer for you. Let me go to Major Collins. Major Collins grew up here in Tampa. You know this city probably like the back of your hand, the county like the back of your hand. As an African American officer, how have you felt? You're a husband as well. You're a father. What's been in your heart and your mind in the last 2 months?
So I can expand even further. You said the last 2 months. Like you said, I've been dealing with it my whole life. So I can't speak to the last 2 months, but I can speak to the last 36 years of my life. My younger brother has been arrested by the agency that I work for. No one in my family graduated from college up until I went to college. So I understand. I'm acutely aware of socioeconomic struggles, and specifically when we talk about racial justice, such as what we're speaking to this panel. Growing up as a young man, I grew up around a lot of older gentlemen who always told me, son, you really have no right to complain about anything unless you put yourself in a position to affect change, which is one of the main reasons why I got into the law enforcement profession. Is growing up within the city, certain things were okay and certain things I didn't think were acceptable. So I put myself in a position to become a law enforcement officer, and at this point, now I oversee a district that encompasses Brandon, and Valrico. So whether that's a position to affect change, I think it is. Also, I have ancillary duties as well. I am the main community liaison from the sheriff's office to the community. So I do have, and the sheriff is very, very. In order for us to affect real change, we have to establish and maintain intentional relationships with the community, not just during times of tragedy or political seasons, but we have to have those relationships in place when things are good and when things are bad.
Thank you so much, and thank you for sure for telling somewhat of some of your background and your story, and even the transparency there. Mr. Warren, last 2 months, Maybe you have a similar story as Major Collins. He can go back further than 2 months, but more intently, for folks that may not know why I'm using the last 2 months as a benchmark, in succession over the last 2 months, we've seen the Ahmaud Arbery case. We saw the Breonna Taylor case. We saw the situation happen in Central Park, and then, of course, the George Floyd murder that we saw. So that's sort of the framework of why I use the last 2 months. But from your personal perspective.
Well, Pastor Harris, first of all, thanks again for the invitation. This is such an important conversation. I appreciate everyone who's taken time on their Wednesday night to join us. As you said before, I'm from Florida, originally born and raised here. I spent my career as a federal prosecutor. I ran for state attorney 3.5 years ago because I knew we needed to change the system. I ran on a platform of ambitious criminal justice reform to make sure that we were not only thinking about the long-term safety of our community, but also about how we promote fairness and justice in the system. And, you asked how we're feeling over the past couple months. It's been frustration. And it's been frustration for me for years, having grown up as a prosecutor in a system that doesn't do a really good job at thinking about long-term strategies to keep our community safe and to make sure that the system is fair and equal to everyone. And when I talk about those frustrations, I talk about things that we all understand. Some of us share these same frustrations, right? Frustrations, especially over the last couple of months, about racial injustice. Frustrations about a lack of solutions in the system, and recognizing that problems run deeper than just the criminal justice system. There are underlying economic and educational issues that lead to disparities in the system. And like so many other people, I get frustrated when we seem to be taking these incremental steps forward, and then we take these big steps backward in the form of the Ahmaud Arbery and in the all the killings that we've seen, going back to Tamir Rice and Laquan McDonald and Eric Garner, now, of course, with George Floyd. But I tell you, some of my frustrations are different than everyone else's. As an elected leader, I know that people look to me for solutions, and it's frustrating sometimes that the solution isn't just something I can buy off the shelf. I get frustrated with watching some of the progress that we've made in Hillsborough get kind of wiped out in the, what's happening in the moment. And of course, my frustrations are different because for a lot of people who are protesting, a lot of people who feel oppressed by the system, because I'm white. I'm a white man, a white father, a white prosecutor. I have different things to worry about. I don't have to worry about, what happens to me in a traffic stop. I don't have to worry about teaching my kids about how they respond to law enforcement. And when I talk with African-American friends and Hispanic friends in the community, and they share some of these same frustrations, but in many ways, the frustrations are different because our different, it's something as simple as the different color of our skin. It just shows us that now's a time, like always, for uncomfortable yet important conversations about how we move our system forward.
Well, thank you for that honesty. I've had the opportunity, as I mentioned, to meet with you a few times and to sort of hear your thoughts, and I would dare to say even your heart as it relates to some of these issues. Let me ask this, because I think a lot of people have questions and a lot of people have angst about things. I'm gonna direct a question really fast to Mr. Warren, and then I'm gonna ask a question of all three of you all really fast. So let me do that really quickly. Mr. Warren, I want to make sure everybody understands what we're doing and the language that we use at our church. We really try to make sure that we don't use, coded language, or we try to make sure that we build a bridge for people when they hear certain things. So people may not know. I don't want to make the assumption that people know what a prosecutor is. And that's the terminology that you used earlier. So if you could just really quickly, in a very elementary kind of way, explain what that means.
Sure. So as the state attorney for Hillsborough County, my office is responsible for prosecuting essentially all the crimes that occur in the county. So after we work closely with law enforcement, but we have a different job. After they make an arrest, and they refer to us, we are the office that actually files charges against someone. We're the ones who negotiate plea deals. We're the ones who take cases to trial. We're the ones who ask a judge to impose a certain sentence. That is the core of what we do as prosecutors, but it's really important that people understand that my mission goes way beyond prosecuting cases. The mission of our office is one of public safety, it's one of fairness, it's one of justice, and I have stressed over and over for the past 3.5 years that we can do so much to advance that mission outside the walls of the courthouse by investing in prevention programs, by keeping kids and other and grown-ups too out of the system before they get in, by helping people transition when they've been in the system and they're transitioning back to being members of our community, right? We do so much to further that mission of public safety and fairness and justice outside simply just prosecuting cases in our courthouse every day.
Thank you. So as those of you that are listening to this panel again, and I saw we already had a couple questions that came in, we're going to try to address them at some point. Go ahead and keep firing your questions off. We're going to try to gather those as best as we can. We've got 3 different perspectives here tonight. We've got the state attorney, not just a representative of his office, but the state attorney himself, who's driving much of what we see happening in terms of cases being filed and followed through and all of that. His office, he's making decisions on that. We've got a sheriff's officer, law enforcement, who also happens to be an African-American male. And then we've got the union president. And for people that may not know, across the country, in many ways, union presidents, in some ways, Ms. Portman, have probably gotten a bad rap because they often will, at least from the public perception, take the side of the officers, whether they have a perception of being right or wrong. So from the 3 of you all's perspective, how did we get here? How did we get where we are with the tensions? How did we get to a place where even I think in our culture, and I don't know if any of you all follow me personally on social media, I've really tried to recenter the conversation in some ways because I think that people in our culture have tried to make this a color versus cop issue. And I don't think that this is a color versus cops issue. I think this is a injustice versus inequity issue. So from the 3 perspectives that you guys bring to the table, how do we even have an injustice issue? And then how did we get here if we do? Ms. Portman, I'll start with you. Uh-oh, you're muted. I'm sorry. Hold on. There we go.
All right. So from a union standpoint, at least my union standpoint, is these officers want to go out there and get to know the community and really want to get involved with the community. But the administration is real big on us being accountable for our time and what we do as productivity. And to me, that takes away a lot of officers trying to get involved and not having to always have to be there when crime happens or only be there when we get called. But we also want to be there to play basketball, get to know the community that we police. And that's where we've not been able to do that. So my officers are being told, hey, listen, you guys have got to be productive. You've got to show your productivity. And sometimes that comes into traffic stops, citations, arrests. And when you push that way like an Amazon or a salesperson, you get quantity over quality. And that makes things bad for the community. It makes things bad for the officers. So we really got to work on how we show our productivity by influencing the community and being around and showing them that, hey, listen, it's not always about an arrest. It's not always about the bad things that happen when the police are called. Sometimes it's just there to just give them a lollipop and hang out with them and ask them how their day is or just be in the community just to know who they are. So that's my feeling on it. That's how the stance that we take.
Pastor, you're muted, sir.
I'm sorry. Major Collins, I'm going to be muting and unmuting your device. I think that there is maybe some CIA wiring happening at that sheriff's department. So it's almost sounding encrypted when we unmute you sometimes. So just know that we'll be muting and unmuting your device. Go ahead, sir.
Is it my turn to speak or am I muted?
Yes, sir.
Okay. As far as I was saying justice goes, for me to tell you that things are perfect would be insulting everyone's intelligence, and it would be borderline irresponsible. Things are not perfect. I will say in Hillsborough County, I think what we do have in Hillsborough County is an anomaly compared to the other places. The relationship that Sheriff Cronster has with the State Attorney Warren, Public Defender Holt, is pretty much unparalleled in any other jurisdiction. The programs that we have in place, we have 7 Boys and Girls Clubs since the sheriff has taken office that we partner with. Not only I say we partner with, we pretty much provide the facility. We have a deputy assigned to every Boys and Girls Club. No 7 Boys and Girls Clubs are spread out throughout the county. And they're primarily in socioeconomic, low socioeconomic areas. Those Boys and Girls Club, we've seen the graduation rate from those areas go from 46% to 96% since those Boys and Girls Clubs have been in place. So some of those programs, and I mean, I could go on and on we have Walk It Like I Talk It, where deputies are mandated to get out of their cars and go talk to the community, and not just talk to the community and ask them questions about criminal activity, but talk to the community and get to know them. We have a multitude of different programs, and we also, and a lot of people say, well, what are you guys doing financially as far as a financial resource to help the community? We have a charity fund. It's called HSO Charities at 501(c). That program is responsible for funneling tons of money out into the community. I know we give money to Men of Vision, and I'm not talking once, I'm talking annually. These are ongoing financial resources that we're pouring back out into the community. Men of Vision, programs like G3, Children with a Vision, Pay Center for Girls. I could go on and on with a list of different programs. We are in working in concert with providing financial resources, as well as having deputies on board to interact with the kids and show them that there's a different way of life and that they can be safe while they do interact with different people.
Yeah, let me interject here before Mr. Warren answers the original question here, because I think Major Collins, maybe you opened up a can of worms here. I was going to wait to maybe save this until a little bit later, but I believe that we as a country and as Americans are smart enough to have 2 conversations at the same time. And I think that there's a way for us to honor and play deference and respect to our law enforcement community, while also holding them accountable for where there are gaps and challenges. You just talked about the good. You talked about the investment. You talked about the partnerships. Ms. Portman talked about where they are making financial investments and officers that are getting out of their cars and building relationships. And I think there's a place for that. I think that there's many law enforcement spaces where that is absolutely appropriate. I think I want to lean in, though, on where the gaps are, and the terminology that is often used is that they're bad apples, right? And I think for the vast majority of the people that are listening to us tonight, we see some of the officers that are doing the great work, but I'm not sure everybody wants a sales pitch tonight, right? How do you lean in on the tension that while there's some great work happening, there's some significant emotional anxiety for the quote unquote bad apples or the gaps in the system as it relates to criminal justice. So how do we, from your perspective, Major Collins and Ms. Portman, how do we deal with that? I want to come back to you real quick, Mr. Warren, but I want to ask the 2 of them that question really fast. And I don't know who wants to jump in first.
So I think the best way we can try to address those issues is on the recruitment and screening process. Obviously, when those people come in, we can try to identify those people when they come in. But as far as once they are in the system, then we do have a complaint process. We have a squad, the Internal Affairs or Professional Standards Squad. They work complaints on the officers. Correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm moving in the right direction. If I'm not, then steer me back to where I need to be going. You're on mute, Pastor Harris.
I'm sorry, I keep muting and unmuting myself. No, I think you're in the right, starting in the right direction, because part of what you're talking about is the screening process and the pipeline to get officers in, and the kind of officers that are there, what determines if they're bad apples or not. And I want to unpack that maybe a little bit later, because I do want to circle back to Mr. Warren. But I think that there's some challenges about who those officers are, and whether or not they can go unchecked or unchallenged or be held accountable for rogue behavior, if you would. So, Ms. Portman, I don't know if you want to add anything to this part of the conversation right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way we go about finding those bad apples is like the major said, is when we hire the hiring process, but also the FTO process. We've gotten away from being more strict in FTO. We've done a lot of
what's FTO? Explain FTO.
FTO is the field training office position officer, where you sit for 16 weeks side by side with a more mature, more seasoned officer, and they train you how to become an officer. If you're not cutting it and you're not making it, the extensions need to be lessened. I think they have too many extensions now. When I came on, you had 2 chances if you weren't making the cut to try to fix yourself. But now they've pushed the needs of officers so much that they've allowed these extensions to go to 4 or 5. And I think if you're not going to make it as a police officer, then you need to find something else to do. That's one of them. But the other thing that we have is called AIMS. So once you're a police officer and you get a complaint, it gets logged into this AIMS system, which logs every complaint that you have. So it could be something as minor as, I felt like that officer was being rude to me in the way they spoke to me, and it's logged in. So the supervisors can track how many complaints that these officers get. Eventually, it'll go to IA. So AIMS is in between your supervisor and going to IA. And then once it gets to a certain level.
What's IA?
IA is our internal affairs or professional standards bureau.
Got it. And so I guess the question becomes, and don't leave me, Mr. Warren. I'm coming to you. Trust me. What's the threshold in terms of complaints, right? Because we've heard, even in some of the other national cases, I don't know, I can't remember the officer's name that had his knee in George Floyd's neck, but I think the news has reported that he had however many number of complaints previously, so from a public perception standpoint, it's like, in many spaces, I'll use education, for example. If a teacher gets a certain number of complaints, they get pulled out of the classroom, right? If a medical professional gets so many complaints, they can't go in and do a surgery, or they can't go in, So I guess from a law enforcement standpoint, Ms. Portman, what's that threshold? Is there a threshold?
I don't even know that there's a threshold. And I always tell the staff and the supervisors, if you guys did your job documenting the incidents that happen with these officers, then I wouldn't have to deal with it when it comes to internal affairs. So I do think we need to hold our staff and our administration accountable for that. And, if they have an officer that's messing up, they need to step in and do something about it. And like I told you before, sometimes it gets to the point where we're like, hey, you screwed up. You're going to have to take it.
So there could be a possibility that some complaints don't actually formally get filed? Sometimes. All right, we'll come back to that. Mr. Warren, I'm going to take you off of mute here. Mr. Collins, I'm going to put you on mute for just a second, Major. I'm sorry. One of the things that I said to you, Mr. Warren, privately, is I feel like there are times where there's really gaps in understanding about the process in general. So can you just take a moment, again, on a very elementary level, and to explain to us what is the process, the legal process? Somebody asked the question earlier in the chat, why does it seem like there's a disproportionate number of people of color that get caught up in the system? So sort of explain, how the law enforcement process works. If I get arrested by an officer, what are the next steps and what does the process look like?
Sure. So there are a couple different ways that it works, and it depends on the type of crime. If an officer shows up on the scene and sees somebody commit a crime and they have probable cause to arrest, they place them under arrest, they send the paperwork to our office, and then we as the prosecutors are the ones who file charges to initiate formal legal proceedings to prove, innocent until proven guilty in this country. So we have to go through a legal process to prove that somebody committed a crime, and then sanctions get imposed. Often for more serious crimes like a homicide, like murders, we work hand in hand with law enforcement. They do the investigation, of course. We act as the legal advisor during that investigation, kind of like what you see on Law and Order sometimes, where the prosecutor and the police work together. But Pastor, if I can go back to the question you had asked before, how did we get here? I want to make sure that people understand we didn't get here from Derek Chauvin putting his knee on the neck of George Floyd for 8 minutes. That's just the latest bump in the road. This has been a generation's worth of problems building. For a generation, we have had this tough on crime, lock them up and throw away the key mentality that sounds really good on a bumper sticker, and it works very, very poorly in practice. Most of the people who come through our system are not bad people intent on doing bad things. Those are the easy decisions we make as prosecutors. You kill somebody, you're robbing people left and right, we're going to lock you up to neutralize you from society. But we have so many people come through the system. Kids doing the stupid things that kids do. People who suffer from mental illness. People who suffer from substance abuse. People who are poor. And they get trapped in the system because of the criminalization of poverty. This is what we've been doing in this country in criminal justice systems for the past generation. And it has led to mass incarceration, racial disparities, excessive sentences, mandatory minimums, perpetuating cycles of poverty, incarceration that deteriorate families, that make it harder for people living on the financial, economic margins of society. And I talk about the economics because we can't talk about criminal justice without talking about access to economics and education. The three go together. So when we're talking about solutions now, when we want to take the passion and the energy that we see in streets all over America for change, and to turn that into long-lasting impact in our criminal justice system, we can't get siloed into thinking that we only look at the criminal justice system for change. We have to look at economic issues, educational issues. The pandemic has exposed healthcare issues. I mean, African Americans are disproportionately suffering from COVID-19. These things all go together. That's how we have to change the system. That's how we address the concerns of the protesters. That's how we do what we've been trying to do for 250 years, to build a more perfect union in this country. But we're not going to do it just by addressing the single act of Derek Chauvin murdering George Floyd. It's much, much deeper than that.
Ms. Portman or Major Collins, either one of you guys want to respond to that at all?
I'll respond to that. I think he's right. He nailed it right there. There's a whole lot of things that are going wrong, and it just festered when Derek Chauvin did what he did. I believe that we need to work on a lot of things. I think the city needs to work on a lot of things. I think the police needs to work on a lot of things. I think the county needs to work on a lot of things to make things better. We need to work together to make things better. I don't think it's a racial thing. I think it's a human thing that we're not taking care of each other like we should.
Thank you. Major Collins, anything you want to add to that, sir, at all?
No, sir.
Okay. Major Collins, I've got you unmuted. Let me go ahead and jump to you on a question. You are an African-American law enforcement officer. Talk about that tension a little bit.
From a personal standpoint, I have a 12-year-old daughter and I have a 9-year-old son. And it is very, very upsetting, very heartbreaking that I've been in this profession for 16 years, and to have to go home and explain to my kids, or actually I can't even explain to my kids what happened to George Floyd. It's unexplainable. But to even try to make it's unexplainable. So that's the best way to describe it. I mean, it's what he did was reckless. It's just no words for it. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for that. I said this to you guys, maybe each one of you. Well, maybe not Mr. Warren, because we didn't have that conversation probably. I know Ms. Portman and I spoke about this, but I think we reached a tipping point, at least because when the George Floyd scenario murder happened, it was one of the first times, at least for me, that I saw law enforcement community intentionally come out to say that was wrong, right? I think in many cases, there has been, even when we saw law enforcement doing something wrong, there was almost this complicit silence from the law enforcement community. And in some ways, there may be a perception of us or the law enforcement community protecting each other. So I'm gonna ask two separate questions, but I'm gonna throw it all at the three of you guys. And a part of this is, number one, Ms. Portman, Major Collins, how do you police each other? How does the law enforcement community hold each other accountable? Mr. Warren, there was a question that came in that spoke a little to what you said earlier. Is there a chance, or is there room there where the state attorney may be too close to the law enforcement community in terms of holding each other accountable? So those are two different questions, but I think along the same line, a number of people ask questions about accountability. So, Ms. Portman, maybe if you want to jump in there first, and then we'll come back to Major Collins.
So how we police each other, how we fix the problem with other officers is that we need to not be afraid to say something to that officer when they start to become aggressive right from the start. If there's something wrong, you need to say something. If the officer's messing up, you need to pull them aside. If you start to see the disagreement getting heated between an officer and the person that they're talking to, the other officer needs to say, hey, listen, I got it. Go sit down. Before it gets to the point where it becomes a George Floyd. If you start seeing something that's not right, you need to say something. And we need to do that for each other, because it will keep us out of trouble when we help each other out. You know, we're not going to get in trouble for something because we're not going to do the things that get us in trouble. We're stopping it before it even happens.
Let me ask this really fast. Are there repercussions for a police officer, and I'm saying police officer in general? Major Collins, don't take offense. I'm including the sheriff in there as well. But are there repercussions? Are there real repercussions when an officer either speaks up or doesn't speak up based on seeing other colleagues do wrong?
Yes, there's a repercussion for failure to report, and it goes straight to internal affairs, which is professional bureau. You'll get in trouble for not saying anything. So
and explain that to our audience. Like, what does that getting in trouble look like? Because many of our audience may not know.
All right, so you go into internal affairs, they do an investigation. If they find that you were there and you did nothing to stop the behavior, you didn't stop the officer, you didn't try to fix the situation, you didn't report it to your supervisor, you are just as accountable as the officer that did the act.
Okay. All right, Major Collins?
I think I'm still on mute.
There you go.
So we do have a failure to act policy as well, and we had a failure to act policy in place prior to this incident occurring. We also have a discrimination policy also as well, and so both of those policies and SOPs cover these issues, and both are subject to termination, depending on what the allegation is and how egregious it is.
Got it. All right, Attorney Warren.
So the question was about, is the state attorney, and we are often the check on law enforcement. You know, it was the state attorney, or the district attorney, as they call it in Minnesota, who ended up charging the now ex-officer with a murder that he committed. So in Hillsborough, we are that check on law enforcement in a criminal context. We don't deal with the civil issues. You know, if they're going to get disciplined internally, loss of pay, suspension, demotion, things like that, we're the ones who bring charges against them. And my office reviews every single use of deadly force case in Hillsborough County. It is a perfectly valid question and a perfectly valid concern about whether prosecutors are too close to make those calls, because we do work with law enforcement every day. We have a symbiotic relationship with them, and then we're asked to go second guess, split second decisions that they make, and it's very difficult. How do we address it? The reality is that you have to have prosecutors in that situation, because they're the ones who understand the law and do this on a regular basis. So whether we give it to another prosecutor's office or we have another law enforcement agency investigate, you still have the same potential conflict. You have people that work together on the same team to try to promote public safety, judging each other after the fact. I think we just have to be willing to do the right thing. I mean, we had a case here in Hillsborough County where I won't get into the details of it, but it was an officer-involved shooting, and we had some concerns about it, and we brought that case to a grand jury. And I'm sure that upset some of my colleagues in law enforcement because we did that. But we thought it was the prudent thing to do, to bring the case to the grand jury, the conscience of a community that decides whether someone's going to be charged with a crime. And the grand jury agreed with how we saw it, which was that it was an appropriate use of force by the officer and he shouldn't have been charged with a crime. But it was a close enough call that we didn't want to just make that judgment for ourselves. And I think you need to have state attorneys who are willing to do that. And you need to have law enforcement leaders like our sheriff who are willing to have those tough conversations and not hold it against the prosecutors, but understand that we are just doing our job to hold law enforcement accountable the same way we hold anyone else accountable, regardless of what uniform they're wearing.
Yeah, that's. I'll be honest with you and say that sounds tough to hear, that the process can feel so subjective and not as objective as it probably could be. But maybe that's a conversation for another day. I have a 3-part question really fast for you, Mr. Warren, since you're unmuted right now, because a couple of questions have come in. Number one, somebody asked, why does it take so long to bring charges against an officer when they've committed a crime? Number two, overall perception, why does it appear as though officers can do the wrong but get off? So many of these cases that we've heard, the Tamir Rice and others, where the officer goes through the trial and then they end up being found not guilty. The Zimmerman trial with Trayvon Martin and so many other cases of that nature. Tell us about that process and tell us, how does that work? Why does it take so long? What are you guys doing behind the scenes, et cetera, et cetera?
Sure. So I know it feels like it took a long time for the DA there to have indicted Chauvin, but I don't think it did. I mean, you had video footage of it, which is obviously a very good view of what happened, but it's not all of the evidence. There are witnesses, right? There are a bunch of people standing there. You have the other officers. The officer himself or ex-officer has a right to talk. He has a right not to talk. So they conducted what essentially was a murder investigation in the span of about 3 or 4 days, which is relatively quickly, even with all those facts there. And it's better that they take their time than rush to judgment and decide we can't charge him when they should be able to, or, hey, we're going to charge someone and then, oops, turns out we don't have the evidence. And the reason why it's really hard against officers is because the law presumes that you have to see things through the eye of the officer. An officer can make a mistake. And as long as that mistake was in good faith and reasonable at the time, that's okay. If you have someone who, has his hand in his pocket and the officer is saying, show me your hands, show me your hands, and the person quickly pulls out a phone and the officer has reason to believe they have a gun, maybe something came in a call over the radio for it, and they fire and they just killed an unarmed man. The question is not, is it murder? The question is, was the officer's belief at the time unreasonable? And it's a very high hurdle. And so you talked about the Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman case. That he wasn't even a law enforcement officer, but in Florida, we have stand your ground law where we have to be able to disprove self-defense. It's kind of the same way for officers. Officers are given the benefit of the doubt. We have to be able to disprove essentially that they were acting what they thought was reasonably at the time that they acted. And those are really difficult calls, even when they're close calls, because the burden is so high to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. Often you probably see situations where it's like, yeah, that guy probably did it, but we can't really convict him. We don't have enough evidence, so we're not going to be able to charge him. And we probably saw that in some of the cases like a Tamir Rice where, he was shot within like 2 seconds of when the officers got there.
Got it. Ms. Portman or Major Collins, either of you guys want to add anything to that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to add to this. We don't claim George Zimmerman at all. Like he was not a police officer. He was a citizen. So I think a lot of people get that confused with law enforcement. He had no law enforcement experience whatsoever. So my question is to Andrew Warren, though. can you explain to the public how long it normally takes a normal just citizen to be charged with murder?
Yeah, I mean, we have cold cases that it takes 10 years to charge people with murder sometimes. Now, that's not the norm, but often it can take a few weeks to gather evidence. You know, in this case, you know who the suspect was. You had a good video footage, but keep in mind, there's still a lot of witnesses there. And it just takes longer than people think. I mean, you want to make sure you're doing everything right to leave no stone unturned, to investigate, to understand what the possible defenses are, to understand what the officer is going to say, why he did it. They're just, 3 or 4 days to make that murder charge is pretty fast. The one thing I would point out, though, is if he's not an officer, he probably gets arrested on the scene with a probable cause arrest. And he's sitting in jail for several days or several weeks until the prosecutor files charges. That's the difference. But keep in mind that that's not special to law enforcement officers, because in the state of Florida, under the stand your ground law enforcement is not allowed to make an arrest until essentially the prosecutor signs off on charging someone. So anyone familiar with the case that, the guy in the movie theater who shot someone who was up in Pasco County over, popcorn fight in the movie theater? He wasn't arrested on the scene. He killed someone. He pulled out a gun and shot someone in the movie theater. But because he was claiming stand your ground, they have to investigate that thing, and it takes weeks and weeks and weeks, even though there was footage of it, until they're able to arrest him and charge him. Look, the system moves slowly. What do they say? The wheels of justice spin slowly sometimes. So I wish they moved faster. I really do.
Yeah. I probably have another 2 hours worth of questions that I have myself and that have come in. I know we don't have that kind of time tonight, but let me pivot really fast to this question really quickly. If anybody in any space has been paying attention to the news and social media, at least the last 7 days, there has been this immediate talk around defunding the police. And I'll be honest with you, as I started doing some research, I'm not sure that term is the best term, but that's just my personal opinion. I'd love to hear from you guys around not the term, but the concepts that are being presented underneath that bucket of, maybe reorganizing, maybe shifting budget, whatever that may look like. What are your thoughts on that from any one of you guys? Matter of fact, let me start with Major Collins. I'll start with you on that question, sir.
As far as completely defunding law enforcement, I don't, like you said, in my personal opinion, I don't think it's the best option. I think in any demographic, any career, you can find some fault or some negativity in that demographic. I can tell you, there's other professions that, and it is not to compare or contrast. Obviously, this situation is very much unique, but I can tell you, within a year in Hillsborough County, we probably investigate 30 to 40 cases of inappropriate behavior with teachers and students. We're not talking about defunding the education system, but I don't think that's the appropriate answer. I think we need to address the individual people. Obviously, if we can identify them before some tragic event happens, then that is the best course of action. But hopefully we can identify these individuals before something does tragic happen, so we can get them out of here and make this place a much better place for everybody.
Ms. Portman?
I think it's an absolutely horrible idea. Don't you want your police officers to be more trained, to have more diversity training? You're going to have to fund that somehow, and defunding them is taking that away. And you're going to have less officers on the street. You're going to have less training on officers. I think that's a horrible idea. You're going to make it worse for the citizens and the civilians. If there's a problem in law enforcement, you're probably going to want more training. You're probably going to want more diversity training. I just don't see why you would take money away. I think you should add more to it to make sure that you have a better officer, a more well-rounded officer, one that can deal with probably stress or de-escalating things better. That's just my opinion.
Let me ask you this, Ms. Portman, because one of the things that I saw, I saw a couple law enforcement officers responding to some comments on social media on an article that the Washington Post did under that banner of defunding police, right? And talked about shifting funds to some more community development kinds of things and, that kind of thing. And some of the officers were saying, we don't support defunding the police, but we do believe that we've got too much on our shoulders. So from your perspective, do you feel like police officers are also expected to be social workers / whatever that is? What are your thoughts there? And I'll give Major Collins a chance to jump in there as well if you'd like.
Okay, it's real simple. We're supposed to be probation officers. We're supposed to be social workers. We're supposed to be psychologists. We're supposed to. Just as clearly as a Baker Act, going to a house, I'm supposed to be able to assess the scene and see if that person is mentally ill and what I have to do to take them to a hospital or to Grace Point. There's a lot. I have to go to a scene where, 2 12-year-olds are fighting over an Xbox game and they got into a tussle because they're brothers and the mom needs help. Under Florida law, it's domestic violence. But I'm trying to do the right thing to have these 2 kids just realize don't hate each other. It's really hard. You have officers doing a lot of stuff. I do juvenile checks at night to check on probation to make sure kids are doing on their curfew. We also have checks on adult violators who are on probation that we have to check on them too. We're doing a lot of work. It's kind of stressed out.
All right, thank you, Major Collins.
Yeah, we deal with a myriad of different issues. We have people who call because their kid won't go to school. That's simply not a law enforcement function, but we still respond to those calls. We deal with mental illness. We deal with opioid issues. We deal with homelessness. Quite frankly, I can guarantee you right now, there's many people watching this panel, and someone came to their house and urinated on the side of the house. They call us out. We would go deal with it. And that's an issue. That's an issue of homelessness. So now we incarcerate that individual. That goes to the state attorney's office, and then what's done with that issue? Have we really fixed the problem? There's all kinds of issues that need to be looked at the background. And yes, we do deal with multiple issues, and that's okay to a certain degree. But there's only so much that one profession can be asked to handle.
Mr. Warren?
Pastor, you had asked about defunding. Defunding is a term that covers a lot of different things now. People are using it in different ways. When you talk about defunding, like shutting down law enforcement, I've heard some people talk about, well, we don't need the police. We can police, our own community. First of all, it doesn't work like that. If you shut down the Tampa Police Department, the sheriff's office would just have jurisdiction over it. So it's not like you're not going to have some law enforcement agency. Most people talking about defunding, though, they're talking about either restarting a law enforcement agency or reallocating funds. That's really what it is. They're talking about figuring out a different way to spend the money. And I think that's a welcome conversation. I agree with Ms. Portman. We shouldn't be looking to take money away from law enforcement at a time when law enforcement is asked to do so much. We just have to figure out better ways to invest in our community. Why is it that we're pulling money out of pre-kindergarten care? Why are we making it harder for families who are struggling to make ends meet, to have daycare for their kids, to find after-school activities for their teenagers? Why are we making it so hard for people based on cutting the safety net that surrounds us, that's supposed to help us? And then people end up, when they don't have those economic opportunities, they end up falling into the criminal justice system. So when we talk about defunding, I think it really should just prompt a broader conversation about how are we spending money in our community? Can we spend our money in better ways to actually shrink the footprint of criminal justice, creating more educational and economic opportunities for people? That's what's going to keep people out of the system. That's what's going to reduce crime.
Let me ask this question to you, Ms. Portman, really fast, because there were a number of questions that came in around officer training, and you mentioned, I forget the acronym you used earlier, maybe FTO, maybe that was the acronym you used earlier. Explain to everyone in a very elementary way, what's the process to become a police officer? What does that process look like? And then what are the required trainings that officers have to have?
Okay. So you start off with 19 weeks in a police academy, and it's normally off-site. Hillsborough County HCC does it. Pinellas does All-State Center. You do 19 weeks in-house if you're doing the full 7 to 5, Monday through Friday. It's intensive training on everything, and everything is legal, driving, shooting, diversity, safe and legal traffic stops. They go through an immense amount of training. Then they get hired on in their selective departments, wherever they want to go. There's another training class in TPD, they called it holdover. And that's another 6 to 8 weeks that they do, where they do scenarios and hands-on training and different things that can happen as a police officer. They also focus more on driving and shooting and diversity and how to deal with situations. And then after that, you do another 16 weeks in FTO, field training. So where you're sitting with an actual officer, you'll have about 2 to 3 field training officers, and that goes on for another, I want to say 16 to 19 weeks. So it almost takes a police officer an entire year before they're let out on their own. And once they're let out on their own, they're supervised by their squad, and they're the rookie on the squad. And supervisors normally show up on their calls to make sure what they're doing is correct. And they go through their reports. There's a lot of, it's called Phase 5. They get to do different areas and learn different parts of the police department. There's a lot of checks and balances. They still have evaluations every 3 months to make sure that they're on par. And if they don't make it through the probation period, which is 1 year in their department, they can be let go at any time. And there's no fighting for them as far as the union goes. You know, they're gone.
So let me ask you a pretty straightforward question, and then I'm going to throw this. I want all three of you guys to answer this question. So you basically just suggested that, said to us, and thank you for sharing that in simple sort of logical format. And basically, in a year's time, if I'm physically fit enough, if I'm mentally tough enough to make it through the classes and the training, I could be in uniform on the road.
Yes.
Is that too short, and is the bar too low?
I think the bar is too low. I don't think it's too short, but I think that sometimes during that phase, that FTO phase, they've allowed people to keep making mistakes and trying to fix them too many times. How many times do you need to screw up before it's like, listen, you're not going to make it? I think we need to be real about that. I understand they've invested a lot of money in some of these officers, but if you know offhand already in the beginning that they're not going to make it, you're going to stop something potentially happening a couple years down the road when it could be a shooting that is bad, or it could be a use of force that was bad, or they could be scared, and that, we don't want scared officers. Scared officers make really bad mistakes. So, in my opinion, I think that we need to be tougher in FTO and not keep people that aren't going to make it, because it makes other people in danger.
Major Collins?
So our process is pretty much similar to what Ms. Portman just stated in her as far as TPD's process. The only difference is I like to address the recurring training. Every year we have what's called annual service or in-service. Not to say that this is a fix-all by any stretch of the imagination. By the state, we are mandated to do either bias-based or cultural diversity training every 3 years. Our individual department, I can't speak to any other department, but our department does that every year, even though we only have to do it once every 3 years. This year, we had representatives from CARE come in and go over the different diversities and that culture as it relates to law enforcement and how they would like to be interacted with. The year before that, it was based off of autism, and not necessarily a race-based diversity, but it was definitely an issue that we've seen as an issue that we need to learn how to interact with individuals who had autism. So I think we need to look at the recurring training. Quite frankly, I've been asked on other panels, hey, do you think training is the answer? And do you think we need to do more bias-based training? Do you think we need to do more cultural diversity training? I could say I don't think that's the answer to the problem, to be quite honest with you. I think if someone's been racist their whole life, I don't think 80-hour class is going to change that. as much as as we would like to make that seem like that's the fix, it's simply not the fix. It's just more of a check and balance, and it's another box to check. When in reality, that's not really fixing the issue.
Before you respond, Mr. Warren, let me ask you this, Major Collins. I was going to ask this question of all three of you guys, so I'll ask the question and let you answer, Major Collins. Mr. Warren, you will have two questions to answer, and then Ms. Portman, I'll come back to you on this last part of the question I'm asking now. How do you all ensure, because there have been a number of reports around the country where, you know, an officer does something wrong, it's clear that they do something wrong, and then they dig into the past, and you discover that they've got affiliations with, you know, white supremacist groups or, you know, really wrong behavior as it relates to diversity and things of that nature. What are your thoughts on that? Do you guys do a sufficient enough screening and digging into their background before they're hired, before they make it through the training? What needs to be adjusted there? What could be done better to navigate that?
We do a very extensive background check. I'm not going to tell you that it's perfect. I think in this industry, we always have room for improvement. So I will never tell you that anything we do is perfect, because that's the furthest thing from the truth. We can always strive to be better. But we do multiple polygraph examinations throughout the recruitment process. We do home visits. Their social media is checked. We do every neighborhood they've ever lived in. We talk to their neighbors. So it's pretty extensive process. But like I was telling somebody the other day, for someone who is, unless you're an overt racist individual, I mean, and you've been pretty good at hiding those characteristics your whole life from different people. It's hard for us to find that during the recruitment process. That's only a 6-month process, you know, maximum 6-month process. That person's been hiding it the whole life. Not like I said, not to say we can't do more. And if anybody's got any proposals of what more can be done, then I'm all ears. But we do a pretty significant job as far as recruitment and screening.
Thank you. Mr. Warren, you've got two questions at your door there.
I'll see if I can remember both of them. We were talking about officer training before. I mean,
yes, sir.
We focus on the bad apples when these things happen, as we should. But there are going to be bad apples in every profession. They're bad teachers, they're bad prosecutors. I'm not sure, but there may even be bad pastors out there. But I haven't met one yet. But
well, there are some. Make no mistake.
Okay. So we need to have ways to hold people accountable when they do those things, and to be able to, you know, sort of catch them when they're bad. But the bigger issue is going to be addressing it at a system-wide basis. How do we do training, screening, hiring, retraining to address these issues? I mean, that's the biggest thing. And, you know, Major Collins makes a great point. If someone's been racist their whole life and they've hit it pretty well, we're not going to be able to catch them until they probably show it in a way that's hurting someone in the community. But I'm not as focused on sort of that overt racism. It's the systemic racism, meaning people aren't intending to be prejudiced, but we still end up with prejudicial treatment of people. And that comes from a lack of understanding. I mean, so Ms. Portman made the point before that scared officers make bad decisions. Officers sometimes get scared because they don't know what the person is doing. They don't know what the person is doing because they don't understand what the person in the traffic stop, why they're doing things in a certain way. When our law enforcement community has those sessions where they talk, officers and citizens, to see things from both sides, it's that level of communication that actually addresses some of these issues that leads to less of that systemic racism. People making snap judgments, not because they're bad in their mind, just because they're stereotyping, because they don't understand. I think that is going to be a much more effective way to address the systemic racism we have in the criminal justice system.
Thank you. Ms. Portman?
Yeah, I totally agree. That's how we change all of that, you know, and I think we need to make sure that we're vetting officers correctly. Like, I agree with the Major, I agree with Andrew. You can't change somebody who's hidden their racism for so long. But this is an age of video games and TV, and people want to be cops because they think that they're 10 feet tall and bulletproof and they can do the job. But once they get here, they're like, oh, I didn't realize all the stuff that I have to do, and I'm actually a scared person. And they think that they're going to move on, but as police officers, as trainers, we need to say, you know what, you might want to go be an accountant or go be something different. We need to fix just hiring people just to hire them. You know, we do have an extensive background check, but I think a lot of times that we need officers so bad, we just hire who we hire and we just give them a lot of extensions. And I just think we just need to be a little bit more strict. I mean, we can be picky. We make good money. We just need to be pickier.
Yeah. Let me ask all three of you guys a pretty pointed question. I want to ask this with the understanding that I think many people that are watching this or may watch this later, we have thousands of people that watch our platforms and engage with us. The media regularly watches us. So I hope people will understand the heart behind this. My fear is that people are so enmeshed politically that they don't hear the heart of a question or actually listen to understand. But my question is, how did we get to the place where the conversation is? How did we get to that place where it's this where the cops feel like they're on the defensive, and people of color in communities feel like they're not being heard, they're tired, they're frustrated, they feel picked on, there's systemic inequity there, et cetera, et cetera. How did we actually get where the conversation is us versus them? Mr. Warren, I'll let you go first, and then I'll circle back to our LEOs.
I think the war on drugs. I think that's been the start of a lot of these problems. You know, 40 years ago, we just started locking people up for using drugs. And it led to massive racial disparities. It led to mass incarceration. It has taken a generation's worth of fathers, young African-American men out of their communities, which makes it hard for them to get back and lead productive lives once they've been in the system. It's not the only cause. There have been a lot of things that have got us here. I mean, I think we've made great strides in our criminal justice system in terms of training and addressing systemic racism and inequality. But I do think the driving force behind this has been that lock them up and throw away the key, tough on crime myth that was perpetuated for 30 years in this country, as if that was going to somehow solve all our problems. All it did was kick the can down the road and create a lot of issues, a lot of tension, and take away a lot of hope, especially in our inner cities.
Before the two LEOs speak, let me ask you this, Mr. Warren. We gave people opportunity on our social media to ask some questions even before the panel started live. One of the questions that came in is, we have moved in the country in the last, 5, 6, 7 years or so across the country where marijuana has been legalized. And now we've got, everything from lotions and potions and fragrances and, everything else that involves the CBD and marijuana, et cetera, et cetera. And yet we've got millions of people around the country that are still locked up from previous years where it was not legal. What needs to change there?
I think we have to look at some of the places that have done this already and see what's happened. I mean, it's not just how many people are we putting into jail issue. It's not just how much does it cost to do this. We have to look at the collateral consequences. When you put someone into the system, every contact with the system increases the likelihood of future contacts. Every contact with the system increases the likelihood of going to prison. And every prison stint reduces the likelihood of being a law-abiding, productive citizen. So it's not just let's say we let everyone out of prison who's there for marijuana charges. It may be the right thing to do, but the question is, what do we do next? We have a whole generation of people that are serving time for drug offenses that are going to have a hard time getting a job, that have lost precious years off the skills they should have been building, that we've fractured families. So I think it's an excellent question. It's a worthwhile point, probably as we decriminalize marijuana or even legalize it around the country, that we have to make amends for people who have been locked up for now what we're saying is not a crime. But it can't end there. The solution has to look past just saying, okay, we're going to say you're no longer in prison, you don't have this conviction. What does someone do who's been in and out of jail 3 times for marijuana charges when they go to apply for a job? Those are the trickier questions.
Thank you. Major Collins, back to the other question of how did we get to the us versus them phenomenon?
So I would have to concur with State Attorney Warren. So the war on drugs was probably the singular biggest issue with how we got to this point. So what State Attorney Warren didn't tell you guys is in the federal system, at least when I worked undercover, the federal system, people would sustain substantial sentencing for crack cocaine versus individuals who had powder cocaine, which is beyond me and how that came to fruition. But so if you don't know, crack cocaine is a derivative of cocaine.
So we know why it happened. we know exactly that it was another way. It was another historical perspective on slavery, right? The folks that were using crack cocaine was a different population of people using the powder cocaine.
Correct, exactly. And that has translation, that has translated from back from 1970, 1980 up until now. And that's a problem that we've been dealing with. And you saw some of that. Some of those sentences be downward departed by the previous president. But 100%, that was probably one of the singular issues that contributed to this issue that we're seeing now.
Portman?
Because that resulted in fewer fathers being in the homes because they were being incarcerated for, in some cases, life sentences for a small amount of crack cocaine when the same individual next to him could have an exponential amount of powder cocaine and be released.
Thank you, Major. Ms. Portman?
I have a different theory. That we were over policing based on stats the department wanted. They wanted citations, they wanted arrests. They wanted to look good so they can get federal money to get more things. They wanted to lower their crime rate so they have something to brag about when they want to be something else. When they want to be a senator or a governor or a mayor or anywhere else. It's the there's over policing using stats that cause the average person to walk down the street and get stopped 30 times in a month because it counted as a field interrogation. It counted as an FI. It counted as a citation to pull somebody over. It counted as a statistic and how we were graded. We were graded on this. So you're causing police officers to do things because if they don't write these citations, if they don't make these interactions, they can't prove that they were doing anything during their shift. Yeah, like I said, hanging out with the kids and playing basketball with them for 30 minutes doesn't show what another officer did for 30 minutes with 5 citations. It's over policing based on statistics, stats, productivity reports, whatever you want to call them, quotas. That's what caused this. It caused a rift between us and the community.
Maybe it was both. Maybe it's not either or. Maybe it's both, right? Where you got what Mr. Warren said, what Major Collins said in terms of the disproportionate laws, policies that were imbalanced, the quote unquote war on drugs and how that was implemented and rolled out into the country. And maybe it was over policing. And I'd like to ask you, Ms. Portman, and I'm going to also ask Major Collins this. What are your thoughts around this conversation of our police, the militarization of our police departments, of our local police departments, and that sort of thing? So, Ms. Portman, I'll go to you first, and then Major Collins will come to you.
Police need the supplies they need. Like they need a gun, they need a flashlight, they need a radio. We need the supplies to protect ourselves and other people. That's what we use them for. Over militarizing, I'm not quite sure. Maybe you can explain what you mean exactly by that.
Yeah. So generally speaking, I think, from an optics standpoint, when we are looking at certain scenarios in the community, you wonder why, you know, officers would come into a neighborhood on a call, or there's a traffic stop that seemingly is simple, and officers they get there's you know impression that officers are getting out of their car with their guns already drawn, or they're getting out in their car with a rifle, or you know officers are showing up at a serve your warrant. It's a simple serve your warrant, and already they've got you know the SWAT. You know, and that may be the wrong terminology, but sort of the SWAT gear and, you know, just the full outfit on, where it feels like the same approach that our military would take in a foreign country, our local police take in a community.
Well, see, being in law enforcement is paramilitary already. We wear a uniform, we wear weapons on us, we are called to a situation that could be dangerous. Warrants are inherently dangerous most of the time, and I mean, Andrew Warren can also tell you this. If we're having a warrant, it was signed by a judge. There's probably some drugs or guns or something in there. That's the reason why they dress like that. And a lot of times it's officer presence for just a normal officer that shows up at a scene. We're there to solve problems that people can't solve themselves. So when we show up, it's almost of a presence of this person is the boss, and this person is going to tell you what to do. And if we weren't called there, then people would have been able to go ahead and make those decisions for themselves. So it's more of an authoritative way of the reasons why we hold ourselves, why we wear the uniform. It's to show, hey, listen, we're here, and now that we're here, we have to enforce the law. We don't have to be that way all the time. But when we're called to a crime or we're called to a traffic stop, it's like we have to show that we're in charge.
I got you. Major Collins, I saw you were going to answer that question and add something to what the question that I asked.
So the militarization, I think, should be situational. It definitely shouldn't be something that we see on a consistent basis. When you speak about SWAT teams being deployed, there we, at least at the Hilton County Sheriff's Office, we have a matrix. That matrix outlines when the SWAT team will be deployed on situations that you just referenced, such as search warrants. There's obviously certain situations where the SWAT team will automatically be deployed, like hostage rescue situations, active situations.
I'm sorry if I didn't mean to give the impression of those scenarios, because I understand that, like, you know, there's some scenarios where you guys have to have, you know, that kind of command of a situation. I'm more referring to, you know, say I get pulled over and I look up, man, and there's 4 police officers all getting out of their cars just for a normal traffic stop. That's the kind of, when I talk about militarization of police, it's that kind of thing that I'm talking about.
Well, that shouldn't be happening, but I mean, not just for any reason. I mean, I don't know if it's intel driven or what. Somebody, I'm not saying it doesn't. I'm saying it shouldn't.
Gotcha. Okay. Mr. Warren?
I don't see how the law enforcement agencies are spending their dollars. I mean, I agree they need to be equipped to protect the community and to protect themselves. But this goes back to the defunding conversation and the allocation of resources. You know, I don't know if our local law enforcement agencies have, you know, those like armored patrol vehicles like you see in some other cities. But there are legitimate questions about whether that's what we should be spending taxpayer dollars on, buying military equipment for law enforcement agencies rather than building other Boys and Girls Club. I'll tell you from my perspective, the investment in a Boys and Girls Club has a lot higher return on its investment than it does buying like an armored patrol carrier.
Let me go back to the question, because man, the chat board lit up, Major Collins, with the question around, you know. So I mentioned the example, and I'm saying that from personal experience. I've been pulled over before, and you know, I look up, you know, I ask the officer why I'm being, you know, stopped, and it's, you know, you were speeding, or you know, ran a stoplight, and, you know, that kind of thing. And I look up and it's 4 officers, and all of them have had their weapons drawn. Someone asked the simple question, what happens if it does? You said it should not happen, but the question becomes, what happens when it does happen? What do you do as a citizen when that happens? What's the response? What should be the response? And then Ms. Portman, if you want to add to that or give some feedback, I'm happy for you to do that as well.
As a citizen, if it happens, obviously you can file a formal complaint through the Professional Standards Division. You can file a complaint with the supervisor, those individuals, direct supervisor if it happens. I just don't see a reason why 4 people would need to respond to a everyday average traffic stop with guns out. I can't find a reason to even justify it. And like I said, I'm not discrediting the fact that you said it happened. I just don't understand why it would happen and what the rationale behind it would be.
But Major, do you believe that it happened?
Yeah, you said it happened. I have no other reason to disbelieve what you said. I take whatever you tell me to be 100% factual. So I have no other reason other than not believe.
Yes, sir.
Pastor, I just want to jump in for a moment as the lawyer here. I want you to understand you have a right to silence before confessing to your speeding. There's
but I'm laughing, and to be honest with you, I think and Ms. Portman's she's smirking over there at us. I'm gonna let her speak here too in a minute. I actually think that's one of the gaps in building bridges here, that the average person, to be truthful, I'm not sure if we understand what our rights are. I'm not sure if we in a broad way even understand what's at our disposal and in what power do we actually have. And I'll tell you guys a story here in just a moment. I see our time is getting away from us, but I want Ms. Portman to jump in here. So thank you, Mr. Warren, for adding that in there. Ms. Portman?
I'm going to agree with the Major on that one. There should be no reason for anybody to come out with guns blazed unless you are a suspect in a robbery. There's no reason for 4 people to come out with their guns out. I understand 4 police officers coming out there if they were FTO squads and they were training on a citation or a traffic stop, but not with their guns drawn.
Yeah, I'm looking here. I got 2 people who said that it happened to them as well. Miss Sophia Baker, who has a teenage African American son, so nonetheless, I think we've got some work to do. I think you guys all acknowledge that we've got some significant gaps in information. Ms. Portman, if you don't mind me saying this, I appreciated something that you said to me privately, and that is that law enforcement generally are reactors. They're not always proactive. And I think that's a challenge. That I think there are things that law enforcement community absolutely should be proactive on. I know, Major Collins, you're in the community. Part of your assignment as some of the ancillary responsibilities you have is to try to be in the community, build relationship, have your ear to the ground. And I think there's a place for that. We have a deputy that serves in our area at the church, Deputy Alvarez, and she is absolutely amazing. We love her, love when she comes to support the church. But I think often there's just still this reactive nature when it comes to the community and law enforcement, which is why we've got you guys on here tonight and other times that we'll have you on even beyond tonight, just to start building a bridge and creating communication. And, Mr. Warren, I know that you, I've been in several meetings where you have actually taken certain sort of public interest campaigns to just educate people on, certain policies and things like that. And I think there's got to be more of that. Here's the final question I'm going to ask you guys tonight. And we've covered quite a bit and we can't be on here all night, but I appreciate you guys' time. Where do we go from here and where is the hope? The unique role that we have in the church is that we are also tasked not just ministering to people's souls, but also in a very practical way, giving people hope. If you listen to this with the wrong lens tonight, you almost feel powerless. You could feel that the system is so big that you are trying to boil the ocean. Where's the hope? Where's the silver lining in all of this? And we started the conversation tonight with, I think, Mr. Warren. So let me start with you, Ms. Portman. Where's the hope? Where do we go from here? Somebody hearing this tonight, what's the next step that they can take as an individual? And that's sort of the line of question that I'll ask all three of you guys.
I think where we start from here and how we fix this is we need to start acting like human beings, and we need to start acting like we can walk in each other's footsteps and treating each other with respect. A respect goes a long way. Officers need to show respect to people. They need to listen. Listen is paramount. I think listen to what's going on and stop being so reactive. Listen before you act. And maybe you can see a different side of a story that you didn't think you were going to hear. We need to work on more community policing, more being in the community and just getting to know the people around there without having to be called to their houses. I don't have to be called. I can just drive by and say, "Hey, how you doing?" Maybe they might say hi to me back, and they may not. But just do those kind of reactions with the community to build their trust back up again. Because just pulling somebody over is not doing anything. It really isn't. So that's how I feel. I think we need to start doing more community policing and less just being like robots.
Thank you, Ms. Portman. Major Collins?
I think the hope is in action. I mean, we get a lot of great discussion out of these panels and forums, but we have to put these words into action. I don't say this in a bad way. I have two kids of my own, but I probably spend time with kids in the community more than I spend with my own kids. And anybody that really knows me will agree with it. I can tell you whatever you want to hear, or till I'm blue in the face, but my actions speak for themselves. So I think until we put some of this stuff to action, we can continue to have all the panels and forums in the world, but nothing's ever going to change.
Does the Sheriff's Department have an independent community review board? That was a question that came in, Major Collins.
As far as what? As far as shooting review boards, as far as complaint review boards?
When complaints come in about officers or deadly force or anything like that, is that an independent review board or is that an internal review board?
So it's an internal. So for shooting review board, we have an internal review board that consists of multiple people, but there are outside entities. Like one of the last shooting review board cases, we had the NAACP president sat on it. So yeah, there's representatives from the Black Advisory Council, the Sheriff's Black Advisory Council, the Hispanic Sheriff's Advisory Council. So there's multiple representatives.
Thank you, Mr. Warren. And we're giving the attorney closing arguments here.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, look, there are a lot of good policy proposals out there. President Obama convened a task force on policing that put out best practices years ago that all law enforcement agencies should be looking to follow. There are principles of prosecution that all prosecutors' offices should look to emulate. But aside from those policy proposals, we need compassion. Compassion would have lifted that ex-officer's knee off the neck of George Floyd. Compassion would have moved those other officers to intervene. Compassion would have avoided that situation in the first place and so many others like it. And we get to compassion through empathy when we understand what other people are going through and the challenges and their perspectives. And we get to empathy through listening. So I think there's going to be the time to move into those specific policy proposals. But right now, it's a time for us to listen. People in positions of power and influence need to really listen, not just, half listen, but really listen to the experiences of people who feel disenfranchised and marginalized in our community. Understand where they're coming from. Let that listening lead to empathy for their situations, and then empathy turning into compassion, not just in the policies that we pass, but in how we carry ourselves as human beings and American citizens every day.
Well, listen, this has been absolutely amazing conversation. I believe a very transparent and honest conversation as well. Mr. Warren, Major Collins, Ms. Portman, thank you all for your time tonight. Thank you for engaging us in an unscripted live conversation, which I know for at times can probably be a little nervous because you don't know what you're walking into. But I appreciate you all so much for your honesty and your transparency. Mr. Warren, let me also say thank you for being able to be honest tonight without it feeling like a campaign speech. I was candidly, transparently a little nervous about that. I know that's the reality of the world that we live in, of course, in terms of elected officials. But I heard your heart tonight, and I appreciate you sharing tonight. Several of our members wanted me to be intentional to invite you, all three of you all, to participate in some of our Love Our City serving events. So I've got all of your numbers and your email addresses, so I'll be tapping you all for that and helping to lean into that. But let me do what one of the things that I have the privilege of doing as a pastor, that when you guys serve on some of these other panels, they don't have the privilege to do that. And that is, I want to pray. I want to close us out by praying. And so if you guys will just give us a moment to pray for you all, pray for the work that you're doing, pray for our community. There's a lot of hurting people out there. There's a lot of hurting families. There's a lot of angry people. And we want to pray that God will give us all answers to move towards solutions, as Major Collins just said. So pause with me for a moment, please. Father, thank you for the awesome, amazing privilege that we had tonight to convene this brain trust of individuals who are not just tonight representing their offices, but they are representing humanity. They are representing individuals that are influencers in their decision making. And Father, we recognize that protests, peaceful protests, change policies, but we recognize that that conversations change communities. So Father, help our conversations and our peaceful protests to create systemic change in our city and our nation. In the meantime, dispatch your angels to provide protection and comfort. We know that our law enforcement community is putting their lives on the line every day. But Father, I pray that you would clearly expose the bad apples, help them to be uprooted and to be removed from such pivotal roles. I know that we have an elected official on here tonight, but God, I pray succinctly that if there's anyone that's in an elected office that doesn't have your heart or your spirit, that God, you will move them out of office. I thank you for the revival and the change and the rebuilding that is going to happen in our community. And specifically in terms of Tampa, Father, we claim this city for your glory. Thank you, God, for the synergy, the bridges that'll be built. Thank you for the love that'll be released, the listening that'll take place. And thank you that our city will be put back on the right track. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Mr. Warren, Major Collins, Ms. Portman, thank you all so much. Everybody that is on tonight, man, thank you all for hanging with us. We went a little bit longer than normal on our Wednesday nights, but I think it was necessary. I saw several dozen people saying, I wish we could have a part 2 or go longer tonight. So thank y'all for hanging out with us. Hey, y'all, devotional is tomorrow at noon. So we'll see the rest of y'all tomorrow at noon. In the meantime, stay plugged in. We got some great stuff coming your way. And we'll look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. God bless you, and we love you. Peace.